So, a couple of things then. So what I've tried to do in this session is it's the expert talk, but I don't think anyone's really an expert on AI at the moment. So I don't profess to be one, but I'm looking for some two-way communication in this one especially. Feel free to agree, disagree with some of the comments that I'll make, because they're my opinions, my interpretations of AI, especially in the risk area. So everyone's got an opinion, yeah. Please feel free to wear that. Also think about what you've heard in the last couple of days. Some of the comments you've heard from Gunjan on the chairman's speech about the principle of now, also about AI. Also some of the comments have been made on the panel discussions about AI. We've heard some yesterday from Adia. We've heard some from today about GDPR. Everyone's got some comments about AI. I mean, what I'm trying to do here, I suppose my goal is to learn a lot from you guys as well, from some of the comments. But also I feel, based on what Gunjan said on the chairman's speech, I think next year, when they have this discussion again, GRC, this summit, AI will be a very serious track within that. I think you'll have someone doing a keynote speech, you'll have panel discussions. So let's take this as like scratching the surface and see what we can do with that, yeah. I've thought about it a bit, so I've tried to look at some of the research that's out there, applied a bit to GRC, but applied a bit more to the op risk area, just to try and give you some examples, because I've also tried to implement some AI in this area, and well, let's see how we get on. So, yeah, I tried to come up with a title that was a bit more interesting than AI discussion, so let's get going. So I was very happy to hear today when French started referencing Stephen Hawking. So I was looking for quotes to say, okay, what is AI? What do people talk about it? But I couldn't find a quote about AI per se that was interesting enough for this discussion. So I thought I'd take this, and it's AI, either the best or the worst thing ever to happen to humanity. Now, when I've spoken to people about AI, a lot of people have come to me with the Skynet example from the Terminator movies. And I did see on a conversation on the BBC with some experts, they did say people's view of AI was tainted by the movies, you know, and what it's about, and what the implications of that are. So, also when we did a discussion with MetricStream about these sessions, they said make sure you put lots of takeaways in there. People want takeaways, so I've got a takeaway on every page, and we can try and discuss that as well. So, when I've been thinking about AI and its application to op risk and GRC, I've always said, like, picture your favorite mentor, your favorite teacher, someone who's guiding you with expert opinion to help you do a better job constantly, rather than picturing your worst nightmare, which is Terminator movies. Because if you think about what AI is going to be, it's probably going to be that person sitting next to you who has the answers to everything all the time and for your questions, that prompts you and guides you with interventions to how to do a better job. And I think some of the conversations yesterday, I think Adi made one yesterday, that AI is not going to replace us workers, us mere humans in the short term. Okay, we can't talk about 20 years' time, but in the short term, we're here and AI is there to support us, not the other way around, yeah? So let's take it from that perspective. Any comments on that? No? Feel free to jump in. So AI today, and this is where I'm relying on you guys to add some interaction here as well. Is AI available within GRC? I don't think so. I did an evaluation last year on GRC tools. I was prompting and asking questions in this area, but no one could really offer something. One of the solution vendors suggested they had some, but I wasn't fully convinced. So therefore, it's not really proven. People made reference to AI working in certain areas with their solution suites, and I'll come to how successful that was, but I didn't think it was proven. So therefore, is it this really fat-free, mythical beast that is there to make our life easier? I don't think so. I just don't think it's there yet. However, if you were to try and implement AI, if you were to do something now, I definitely think you'd be the first mover. Yeah. I think you'd probably generate a lot of interest in the work that you do. I think there's lots of opportunities there, but you're going to uncharted territory sometimes. So you have to bear that in mind. And does anyone have the answer, really? I don't think so. I don't think, based on what we've heard today, Do we really have experts? Maybe in Silicon Valley with people from who deal in natural language processing, PhD students, people who've been snapped up by Google's, Facebook, etc., but not really in the GRC world. Again, any comments if people disagree with that, or have people seen that as well? Yes?
I'm not seeing, but I think the collaboration between IBM Watson and compliance, I think, is a good stage, and they are actually moving into the operational risk space now with Watson.
I'm glad.
It's a very early stage, and I'm not going to say that it's where you think it is,
yeah.
or where we may mentally think it is, but I think it's a good beginning.
Yes, no, I agree with you. I don't disagree, and I have got some first-hand examples with Watson, but I don't really want to bring those up too much by name. Let's see. I also looked at then Gartner. So luckily we have an agreement with Gartner. I've spoken to John Wheeler on this, who's the main person in the GRC space from Gartner. I think if you've ever seen a report, it's normally got him referenced. Highlighted here, maybe hopefully it's a bit clearer for you. So they see areas that are transformational, and they see DMR, or DRM, sorry, digital risk management being in this space, and this is what they hang AI to from Gartner, and also digital ethics. But they also see this out there in 5 to 10 years. So people saying AI is available now, we can apply it, there's a bit of a mismatch there, and a bit of a gap. I've also seen people discuss that anything you see on these sort of research papers, that something is 5 to 10 years, you half it because transformation happens quicker. So maybe 2 years, potentially 2.5. We don't know. Let's see. But I think it's important, and when I read this, it was very interesting to me to think about, I thought about AI and I thought about digital risk, and I thought, well, I can understand the implications of that. But what was a challenge for me to consider is, how does digital ethics and the way that we're going to communicate with our workforce, if we just take the principle that AI is there to support us, if you start thinking about digital ethics and what that means, how will these chatbots communicate with your staff? How will they suggest to you that tasks are late? It's the human element of a good boss, and this is what I think about, picture the good boss analogy. The good boss there is to tell you the bad news softly to keep you encouraged. If we don't think about these things from an AI perspective, it could be quite common that you'll start getting a mass emails from some chatbot saying your task is late during 3 days, during 2 days, during 1 day. How is that helpful for anyone? And I think we have to build digital ethics into people's culture and think about it from that perspective. And I think it's a very interesting and emotive subject to think about when you talk about AI, culture, ethics, those sort of points. Again, because I don't believe anyone's in that fantastic position yet in our space that we're talking about here for this summit. So I think if you start planning for it now, there's lots of things we can do now. We can start thinking about where we want to go. And I'll come back to the reason why it's important, because if you have the place you want to go, you have the scenario set up that you think will probably benefit most from this new technology. If you start working on it now, the transition will be easier. And if you think about what Len was saying today about one of his takeaways saying training was an impact, etc. Well, if you think about your use cases, your scenarios now, what it takes to train people, are they trained on today's technology? How could we transfer quickly to tomorrow's technology? Yeah? I think you can do a lot more today than we appreciate sometimes. Any comments on the Gartner topics? Because this is new, this is from July this year, and saying AI is transformational in the space, but perhaps 5, 10 years away. Do people see it in 5, 10 years, or do you see it sooner? Come on, anyone? Yes?
I think to an extent it might depend on the adoption of other technologies. Because if you think about things like autonomous vehicles, there are risk implications around that, and therefore there might have to be AI type considerations built into that, and that sort of thing might help to bring forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many scenarios. I think what I'm trying to discuss here is I can start scratching the surface. And when I started looking at this, there was just so many elements and avenues you could go down. I was thinking, well, how can I talk about this and make sure it's interesting and meaningful for the audience without saying, well, it's everything, because it could be, everything's interrelated. But it's a very good point, so let's see if we can incorporate that a little bit. So I've tried to incorporate this somewhat in GRC and a bit more in op risk. So you might have seen this sort of model before, enterprise control, etc., etc. So I'll try and go through these steps and see if we can really flush out where AI could be applied here. So I try to think, okay, well, how could it be applied then for on the value chain and processes? Len mentioned something today, and I think if I go actually just straight away to the takeaway and work backwards, this is then some of the comments that I think Lisa and Marc made in yesterday's discussion. So one of the key things for Lisa was everything has to be aligned to the appetite, yeah, which is important for me, I agree. And also Marc said something like, okay, well, what's the difference or what's missing from our tool set? If we all have the same tool set, what's the difference? How can we differentiate? And Marc said, okay, we don't have that secret sauce yet. And I think Lisa said something, we don't also have, you know, the answers there. But maybe if we think about the way we apply AI, maybe that could be an element of the toolbox. Maybe that could be the secret sauce that makes the change, that makes the business want to have more discussion and dialogue with risk management. Yeah. So if I work backwards from there, so predicts risk on the value chain changes. When I was thinking about this, it's got to be possible that if you integrate the process landscape with your risk landscape, etc., if you understand and AI has a capability to see where process changes take place and differences are occurring on the processes, because they happen quite a regular basis, maybe not the highest level naming conventions, but the content of the process. Things change within IT projects. It becomes an automated process rather than a manual process. If you could continually scan your process landscape, you would probably be able to have much more clarity on where risks could have changed. Because what I feel sometimes with the people that I've worked with, is that everything is not a now activity, like Gunjan said. It's basically, as Len said today, it's more glacial. Things happen over a length of time. So if we can convert that and say, well, is it the greatest win? Potentially not. But if you can really identify real time, continue to scan your ecosystem to say where are the process changes, that's going to have an effect on the rest of the organization. Your risks that you assign to those, are they still valid? Yes, no. How do those risks then sit with various RCSAs? Are they valid? Do they need to change? Do the controls still valid? Etc., etc. If you think about that you don't have to do the legwork of constantly looking through all this wealth of material, but you have artificial intelligence scrolling through all the time, then it's more pinpointing and say, you have a change on this process which will affect these risks. Yeah. And I'm glad Watson was mentioned earlier. So the self-validating risk register, okay? What does that mean? Well, we went through a process of RM framework change. The list of risks that we had as part of the risk register was deemed just too many, but that was based upon a numerical evaluation. I don't want to see 4,000 risks. I want to see 2,000. Okay, based upon what? Yeah, it's based upon a number. Now, if we start thinking about that in relation to AI, is it purely the fact that the people within the organization are nervous to do with the volume of work which is required to manage 4,000 risks and the continual effort you have to put through to maintain that list, to maintain the content, to revalidate, etc., potentially? So if you were to have then a self-validating risk register, the number of risks is irrelevant. What you could have is a constantly expanding and contracting risk register, which constantly takes into account elements within your business that either create or put into an inactive state risks, can also consume data from outside the organization. Just say there's a particular event that's happening within the financial industry, which in theory could produce lots of new risks for you. That could be ingested by AI, discussed, okay, is it something that's important? The risks are created, Then there's the interaction with the humans, interaction with colleagues, to say, okay, are these valid, yes or no? And that's probably a much leaner, quicker process than evaluating the material, going through, having meetings, etc., which are valid, but the whole length of the process is extended. With an AI, you're trying to say, well, what answers can you give me to shorten that cycle? So this is where I come through to a bit of an example with Watson then. So Watson, there are other AI tools available, just because we're being filmed. I asked for an evaluation to say, look, could you compare the risks that we have against each other? Just a simple test. So I want to see, because I know risks have been created, risks have been consumed from various consultancy companies that say, okay, these are the risks which are appropriate to your industry. And we know that people have created other risks, have they really checked them, etc. Can you just compare them against each other? That wasn't such an easy task. Yeah, it could go through the text and look for particular words, but it couldn't interpret the words in the context of the risk, and it couldn't also then say these risks are the same. Yeah, and for me that was quite an eye-opener, because I always thought, based upon the language used around AI, the way it was sold to me, that was a simple task. Okay, so it wasn't quite there. I'll make more reference to that a little bit on the controls, but if you're doing that self-regulation and it's not there, you can't understand which ones are needed. If we bring in new risks, it may be able to consume information from external sources and say this could be a risk to you, but then you're just adding a new risk to your catalog or your register, rather than saying, well, actually that new risk makes 4 other risks inactive, or we can merge with this risk. It's just not that level. And that's why I think you need to be careful of where is it and what can be done at this stage. Do they align to the risk appetite? I think basically, if you're looking at it from multi-dimensions, if you've got your appetite within the organization, saying you really want to focus on a particular subset, okay, do you have the associated risk within your register that deal with that? If you're looking at a new market, do you have the risks that allow you to look at that? Or is there any nuances with that new market or that new regulation out there that means there's a gap? Yeah? If you can scan through all that information and do it real time, do it quickly, then it takes away a lot of the legwork, and you're really in a much more advantageous position. Okay, so I've mentioned also about the external inputs. Are they missing? So I think, yes, we've talked about, there's lots of talk about consuming data from social media, from regulation, and I know there is a tool out there that scans regulatory documentation. Yeah. However, if you look at then the results it gives you, it's only suggestive. It says, okay, we found a comment within a regulation that suggests there's an obligation to you. Do you agree? And that's basically looking on word searching, though. It says like a steering committee or something like that. So it tries to pull out these things. So it's getting there. And I agree with the comment you made earlier. It's making the right steps, but is it to the level we want it to? Probably not. So that's on the identify bit. So any comments or yes, please. Sorry.
It was interesting what you were saying about vendor. I'd seen the demonstration, again, using that kind of plucking out words, you don't put the data in front of you, and then you look at it and go, okay, so where it's not here or not. So I get that bit in terms of where it is today, collecting information. We started off about the processes and the process landscape,
Yep.
which I think is the start of any of this journey. How do you see AI today helping us with process mapping? We can't go out and do the process mapping. The humans still have to do that.
Yes.
Put the information in there and identify the risks themselves and line it up. You're still at that basic stage. Is that right? I mean, I'm just trying to see.
No, I agree. Yeah.
AI is today and how far away an actual really comes.
I'm interested to hear other people's comments, but for me, I haven't seen anything in that area. It wasn't one of the focus areas from any of the solutions I've seen. But I mean, as I say, there's not much AI in the GRC space. Is there AI associated with process management? I suspect they're probably going in the same direction. They'll probably still rely on someone to create a process, document it manually, then we'll review it and say it may match or compare to these other processes. You know, looking at, even it's more sophisticated, looking at the wording and say, well, actually, your wording is contradicting what you're aiming the process to do, etc., etc. Is it being too specific? Is it naming a particular person? You know, sometimes I've seen people reference in certain things where you shouldn't reference a person, you should reference a role, that sort of stuff. I mean, anything along those lines, but that's as much as I've seen, so I can't profess to be anything more advanced than that. Yeah?
So Mark, what I've seen is it's a stepped approach, that companies are kind of starting now with analytics,
Yeah.
moving into machine learning, and then that leap to AI is going to be halved, because we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But you know, having spoken to a few startup companies, they kind of say that the starting point is getting the analytics right. Then we get into machine and deep learning. And once you've gotten that right, so the machine learning part, which you kind of explained now, is saying, can you start looking for these anomalies? And can you teach the machine to start looking for it?
Yes.
So base case, start, teach, and then you can actually make that leap into AI. So it is baby steps.
It is baby
My
steps.
experience.
No, absolutely agree. And it's the teaching bit is important as well. So what do you teach? Sometimes you're that juxtaposition where you say, well, actually, you're telling me there's an AI solution. Why do I have to teach it? Surely it's intelligent enough to know what it should be doing to be teaching me. So, but yeah.
I sometimes wonder whether that is really artificial intelligence or just augmented intelligence. I think it's augmented at the moment. I think you're right, it's based on stats and rules that we come up with that can help analyse that data. You know, whether and probably with a lot of the natural language processing as well, where we can interface, whether it's by chatbots, it can kind of detect what we want to do, but interact with us in a way that is easy for us to do. You know, we want to log a risk event. We have to know where to go or how to do it. There should be a series of questions. We can enter it, and it can enter it onto a system. You know, if we want to classify, well, you know, which control is this risk event mitigating, or which control failed. You know, we'll have a look at the description, we'll teach it some rules, let it try and learn for itself. So I think there's things that we can do, but I think it's still early days, and probably more, like I said, augmented rather than artificial. So I think it's just kind of telling it with some guidance what it should be doing for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all becoming enlightened that it's not there. It's like, well, what can we do? Another example then, so on the control elements, so this is where I did try and do a bit more work. So we had a long list of controls, and again, it was, can AI self-validate controls against controls to look for duplications, to look for similarities, look for anomalies? And again, it was more of a textual search. And I think one of the highlighting facts for me is the people working with us saying, well, give us some context, and I tried to do that, what you're trying to do, and I tried to explain the comparison. So I asked them then they did it basically purely on words. Then I asked for, well, actually, groupings are better. So if you're doing it on words and you're doing individual words, can you show me which one have the biggest hit rates? Or try and group them in themes or something. Then I got the next generation of feedback. I looked down to look at the themes for the controls, and I came across an arts and crafts theme. I said, well, how is this possible? And they look at the wording they'd picked up on was models. So they translated the models into an arts and crafts theme. It was a simple mistake, but it's more the fact also that when I was asking for the textual search, I said, well, you know we're a financial organisation. You know this is against words associated with op risk in some way. So the term model needs to be taken in that context rather than purely a dictionary context, because maybe arts and crafts is the first one in the dictionary for the meaning. I don't know. The other one was futures. It had a section about options, etc., financial options, financial products. Whereas if you look to the text, it was just talking about future cash flows. So looking at the individual words wasn't working. It needs to look at the context of the sentence and say, well, group that together. And that's where it couldn't quite reach the level we were expecting. Again, the same principles apply then for the risk register, the control catalogue. So I don't want to go through that because we're running out of time as well. But it's basically, can you have an ever-expanding control catalogue, expanding and contracting based upon the needs of your company and your organisation, the splits for your legal entities, your business units, that doesn't require you to be driven by a number of controls, which your organization thinks is the maximum level. Yeah? It should be appropriate and suitable for your business. And if then you can do that, consequently it can expand and contract based upon drivers to the content of that material. What was interesting again, and where teams are going to be more important then, is the self-assessments. So I also try to do something with another organization, and we touched upon this with when we did our GRC tool evaluation. What is your integration with collaboration tools? So I think Len mentioned it today as well, and I've found this within my experiences. People use Opera's tools infrequently, or GRC tools infrequently. Therefore, to get to the level of flow where they can just go in there, do their job, and get out in 5 minutes, is only achievable after several times of trying to do the same task, and they get frustrated and get calls going, this tool doesn't work, etc., etc., because they can't attain that level of flow. So how can we change that and bring it into a collaboration world, into a tool set which makes it feel like home for them? And Len mentioned again about training, about it's not similar to a Microsoft tool or email or anything like that. But because of today's technology, if we can transfer, say, a self-assessment from a sheet, or even like an interactive one, which is like you're allowed to enter data in that, if you can place it into a world that your users, it feels like home for them, so it doesn't go from a link from an email to a tool which they don't know, which they're expected to understand, fill in, etc. If you make it feel like home and you can collaborate that in a different environment, you're going to probably benefit from that. Now I started thinking about this a bit more and said, well, if we can take then elements of that and put it into a collaborative environment, we can do a lot more on the digital workforce analytics. How long does it take for a control to be reviewed? Or, I mean, how long does it take a self-assessment to be reviewed? All the risks, the controls, issues created. Because if you have all those individual elements in a collaboration forum where people are emailing and it's automatically tagged to these things, you can build up the analytics about the effectiveness of these sort of things. Yeah? With that said, then you can even take it further, because I know, and I think Lena mentioned it yesterday about, some of the audits, if we do questionnaires, etc., you haven't got to document it. In the future, I mean, near future, so it's not too far away with these collaboration products, if you were to have your self-assessment in a collaboration world, of which then you had a group on basically the controls or a risk or something, whatever you deemed important, if you had meetings on that, say a digital meeting, a teleconference, these things can be automatically transcripted, yeah, tagged with material, the emails tagged around that discussion. So all the discussion you're potentially missing from a specific tool focused on is it complete yes, no, to all the collaboration that happens, the telephone calls, the chats, the emails, the meetings, whatever you want, comments in additional deliverable documentation. If all that is tagged, then you can see how is this working, and you can do digital analytics on the workforce. With then AI, to take your comment further, if you have that purely that analytics, you can say, well, why is this team performing better than that team? What intervention can AI understand to work out, okay, how can we improve the working of other teams based upon this team? Is it then stretching out into various other areas of your organization? Well, this team has a more diverse mix. It's bigger, it's smaller. This team was more engaged. They were sharing and consuming data between everyone within the group, which is a definition of a high-performing team, as opposed to one or two individuals. They were having more phone calls, whatever. They had the training far in advance on certain elements than other teams. This wealth of information then becomes available for you to do the analytics, to then learn from. So in the future, you can say, well, to replace this, we can have interventions with chatbots to say, it looks like I mean, even the wording, so digital ethics, your work is stagnating in this area. Think of a nicer word than stagnating. This is an intervention we recommend, which is all coming from artificial intelligence and a chatbot in some way. You don't need them to then go to a manager and say, well, actually, I'm stuck, or a manager to find 2 weeks later that a task has been inactive for 3 weeks. Those sort of things. So we're running out of time, unfortunately. So again, on the example with also then the machine learning, with controls and the massive controls you have, also what I was looking at is the content of the controls. So does it have a performer in there? Does it have a piece of evidence, a frequency, etc.? Even the analytics on those weren't there yet. Yeah, it couldn't quite pick up that a word like review was similar to analyze, and therefore that was the word describing part of the control. It couldn't check up do we have a taxonomy where a piece of evidence is stated, and this also relates then to process, is that evidence and part of a process? Is it part of a deliverable named within the organization and the same terminology is used throughout? It wasn't possible. I mean, even in that one tool, it was hard, but therefore to then link that throughout your organization and say, is it related, yes or no? It just wasn't there. But I mean, that's where it could go, and this is where I see the value of it. So a little bit of a link then to your earlier process question. Avoiding issues, etc. So if you're working on a self-assessment on the controls and you had AI involved, what we're looking there is for is predictability to say a particular team is working on a self-assessment, it's got these risks and controls. Other teams have found issues on the same combination of risks and controls. There's a likelihood you may have something similar. Look at this before you find the issue. So therefore, basically, you could try and get away from having to create an issue because you know that other areas are sharing the same self-assessments. It's a very simple technique, but I think it's one maybe that could happen, does happen informally, formally within meetings within an organization. But if you have this at a regular basis, that again, AI is screening through all this to look for these similarities, to put it on the plate in front of you, there's more likelihood that these things are going to occur. Let me just quickly jump on.
Excuse me.
Yes, sorry.
So at what point right now do we blame the machine, or is it that right now that we don't have the requisite experts who are helping to educate AI?
Well,
Or is it a mixture of both or none?
Obviously mixture, I'd say mixture. It can't be none. So we'd have to then, I mean, I'm interested to see the session after lunch, which is also about AI, to see their view, because I would then like to see, okay, what are organizations doing in this area? How it's related to GRC solutions? Okay, what do they see the gap? Now, I'm hoping they're going to ask for support and say, we're early stages, we're looking for support, we're looking for input. If they're going to say they have it already, I would challenge that a little bit. Yeah. So, a bit of a long answer, but I think it's a lot of the things. It's a lot of things you mentioned rather than none. On the measure and monitor then, so again, this is, if you think about the takeaway and what I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to say it could be the best mentor you've ever had. So in order then to measure and monitor, if you were to continually have a mentor in the background chatting you, stating what you're missing, stating what was learnt best from past experience, if you're stuck in a particular task, say you have this wealth of experience in these areas, which you know deep in the back of your head somewhere, but if that was to be brought up to you on a plate from AI, saying use these reference cases to help you increase the velocity of your work, that's the way you should look at AI with mentoring. Lisa mentioned something yesterday about she even looked at some of the quant models and checked them themselves. Now, this is where AI could definitely come in. Imagine if, rather than someone have to manually go through that, if you knew there was the risk and controls related to these quant models in the background that could be checked through. We don't need the manual intervention. That was Lisa doing the over and above extra work. But that's where an opportunity could exist. So again, to challenge the risk monitoring. So what's at risk? Change the processes to apps to people. And when's the intervention needed? So again, because AI could spread out and look at these multiple areas, you have a great opportunity to say, well, if people are changing or haven't been engaged within, say, a self-assessment team, is an op risk manager being spread so thinly he can't really contribute to the multiple self-assessments he has? All these elements could be provided to you, which currently requires someone to go through and understand the landscape of the people employed on a particular area, their business unit, their pipeline of work. They can do it, but it's so much data to process. And what you're trying to say, well, that data could be processed by AI to free up the other person to do more interesting activities. Support teams to monitor. So this one here, bring the knowledge in from everywhere and anywhere. So, look, there's so much information out there. We have these digital workplaces. Everyone's talking about digital transformation. Okay, every piece of information we have is digitized. Based upon the work or the knowledge that the organization has about me, does it really consume the training courses I've been on, the knowledge I've learned from those, the fact that I'm a blue analyst type person, and associate that with all the tasks and the activities I get distributed with? Guarantee no. Yeah? That's something a manager might have to do if he has time, but that's where something could be done. That's the sort of the level of information it could extract about me that exists today and bring it back in. I think that's a real gap. Learning from peers. Look, if I'm doing a particular activity, I like to go out and sort of speak to peers, consume knowledge from them. But if I had all that information digitized that was provided to me, it'd be so simple. So if I'm looking at doing a particular task, and this is where I suppose you can think about the first line of, well, the first level, so the risk takers. If they are working on a particular activity, imagine how cool it would be that if the task they're performing could be in a portal view rather than directly in the application they're working on the side, it already states the associated risks, op risks, for example, that are applicable to the activity they're working on, so they can understand what's going on and the controls that are in place to help them with that. And if it's all in one place, in a portal view, so you have a snapshot of the tool that they work on daily, next to it all these other activities, it's putting the information there for them, rather than where would they search today for that piece of risk information? It'd be on the self-assessment. Would they go to that? Debatable. Would they know about the controls? Maybe through access rights, I don't know. But then you can push all that information to them, and then if it's not deemed necessary, they can park it somewhere. But I mean, this is where all this information is available. We just need to present it in the correct manner, to the correct time. So AI could be the best monitor you ever had. That's, I suppose, one of the key points for me. Is there anything else I just wanted to touch on? The reports, I suppose the oversight is the key element here. Because we're running out of time, it's more important that I wanted to express here that if you have a digital workplace, if you were to have AI, as we talked about, hoped about, there's very much a great opportunity that you could even challenge your methodology. So if your methodology is in place, with all the information it's gathered from you applying that methodology, the risks you have, the controls, the self-assessments, the issues occurred, the loss events occurred, etc. Could it run back through and say, well, actually, your methodology could be changed, streamlined here because of the legal entities, the org structure, the business units, the people involved, the tools involved. It could always challenge, it'd be that challenging person to help you identify areas you can improve constantly. And that's why I wanted to say, even if we talk about AI in this, it could be the best thing or the worst thing, think about it from the best perspective, that it's always there to help you. And you're just trying to find those nuggets of information throughout your organization and say, well, where's the best place to start and apply this? I can't tell you that, I don't know, because there's so much difference between us all. Each organization is different, the tools we use, our culture, the way we do things, the tasks, the people involved. You have to make that decision. I'm trying to say, I'm scratching on the surface to say, if you think about these things, don't be daunted by AI, don't be daunted by someone saying, oh, this is coming, you need to get on board dead quick. Think about, okay, how's it applicable to me? How can I benefit? How can our organization benefit through the application of this? That's the key point I'm trying to make it. And this is what I try and hope to get across in this presentation here. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm trying to ensure that we have this dialogue, because I know this is going to come in next year's summit. And maybe this will be a foundation layer. And what we can think, well, what I'll do, hopefully if I'm back here next year, is look at the statements I've made, the comments that came from other people, and say, are they still applicable? Have they happened, occurred, not occurred, planned? And that's where the interest is going to lie, because at the moment, no one really knows. So with that, I'd like to ask Q&A, comments, feedback, please. Oh, there's a microphone at the back. Everyone's stunned into silence. Come on, don't leave me here by myself. No? All right then, I'll take that as a... thank you.
How about,
I was just going to suggest another related topic, although given that we don't we can't say where we think it'll go.
Mm-hmm.
But against any of these issues, what about culture change? Because that's always equally, if not more important than the technology.
Absolutely agree, and this is why I mentioned a little bit about digital ethics. That to me is, if you look about the topic digital ethics, is the underlying culture that an organisation has, the cultural shifts. What culture do you possess? So just as a tangible example to chew on is, if you're communicating a task with someone in a hospital, I would suggest the language and the tone you use is very different to if you communicating a task in a stockbroker environment. The language you use, the tone you use will be completely different. And that's based upon also the culture of the organisation. And that's how, when I think about digital ethics, I think that's what I think about. Whether it's what you think about, I'm happy to hear, but that's my view. Yes, please.
Where now that we're beginning to see on like DLT consensus-based algorithms, and where do we place things like consensus-based algorithm that we're using on things on DLT now to thinking about that from an operational risk perspective in terms of managing what they call no-tree nodes that supervise DLT,
Mm-hmm.
and actually provide verification that a transaction was a properly approved transaction, no double spend, and all these other things. The beginning of resources that are being used now in a controlled environment. Where do you put that in terms of AI, on the scale of AI? Very low down, somewhere towards where we should be going?
Well, where it is today or its potential?
No, where it is today. Where's that on the scale? Very low? Is it just not even AI?
My view is it's quite low. I don't think it's there at all yet, but anyone else in the room having a difference of opinion? I mean, what's your view? Where do you think it's placed?
I'm doing some work actually with somebody right now, and one of the challenges they have is some of these what they call notary nodes, which are supervisory nodes on the ledger, are beginning to make decisions about whether the transaction is a good, valid transaction, and it's almost self-learning at this point,
Mm-hmm.
not quite. So I'm not sure if I can call it automated reactionary
Okay.
or self-learning. So I was just wondering if you had an experience.
No.
I'm not sure. It's beginning to feel like it because each time the node works against the transaction, it now knows, it's seen out of the transaction, it now knows whether that transaction is a good transaction or not based on a previous experience.
Yeah.
It's beginning to look like it. I just don't know where you put it on your scale.
No. I mean, it just sounds like very much like a learning experience. The more knowledge it gathers about the...
But that's not really,
Yeah.
you would not consider that you're in AI.
No, it would. I mean, it relates to the fact you have to train it to say what's good, what's bad. Then over time it learns from that and saying, okay, well, does this fall into those realms? Then at some stage it makes its own decision. And you say, this is bad, and you either accept that decision and just, you don't even look at it, you just go through the process, or you take it back to a review process and say, do we review our AI mentor, or do we let it pass through the system? Okay, so there's a question at the back.
Do you think there might be a risk that AI itself is something which kind of is always in the future? It's always something that people are looking at and saying it's going to be 5-10 years from now, because once the actual statistics and the processes get used, people kind of just look at them as statistics and processes. So, it seems to be something where it is always the sort of thought of the Terminator and the idea of this mystical, thing which is going to be incredibly high level, and a lot of the time the things it actually helps with are really boring. Like, I think a lot of what we're seeing in things like in banks and so on is AI being used in natural language processing and document ingestion and so on. Just banks ingesting thousands of documents every day and scanning them and using them in, I think, Watson and Promontory and so on are using them in a regulatory from a regulatory standpoint as well. And all that is kind of bland, and it's nothing quite like the idea of, you know, something which is going to be like a person sitting around helping you out. And so, do you think that's something that happens? Do you think that we sometimes, you know, we're never going to see, like, AI is always going to be 5 years down the road, because once something is just productized, we no longer really see it as AI. It's just something something that we're using.
No, it's a very interesting point. I mean, it's. I think the proof in the pudding is going to be the discussion next year, and say, well, is AI really a topic of discussion at this GRC Summit or not? Has MetricStream positioned itself, provide or invested in AI? What is that? What is the AI? It's or does it become nothing? I mean, it's entirely possible that AI skips the whole GRC landscape and moves on to something more, well, what is considered more interesting. Yeah. So, you know, if you think about where AI is at the moment, Google, Facebook, behavioral analysis, et cetera, is that more of a? It's more revenue generating. That's where it's focused at the moment. No, I don't think anyone can deny that. I mean, that's where it is. Has Google invested in a GRC solution? I don't think so. Is Facebook? I don't know. I doubt it. But yeah, it could always be that thing that's 2 steps away. That's always in someone else's industry, still always being utilised by the organisation next door in a different area, and not financial. Entirely possible. Is that it, Deepak?
Yeah, I think with that, just really want to thank Marc for opening our kind of thoughts to, is AI, is it the best thing or is it the worst thing? It's there's lots I think that's going to happen in the next couple of years. Great to have you back next year, Marc, to talk about what's happened. But thank you for your time.
No, thank you everyone.